Some places don't resist you with noise. They don't scream. They don't threaten. They wait. And if you've ever believed land is just land, something you can measure, buy, cut, and sell, then what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible. But I lived it. I survived it. And the marks it left on me are still there. Before I tell you what happened in those woods, do this first. Subscribe to the channel if you want real feeling horror stories like this. The kind that crawl under your skin instead of jumping at your face. Like and share this video with someone who believes nothing like this can happen. And when you're done listening, comment where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Because where you are matters more than you think. I've spent most of my adult life building things. Highways that cut through mountains, industrial parks where forests used to breathe, facilities so large they changed the weather patterns around them. I was good at it. Too good. My name doesn't matter much anymore, but for the sake of this story, call me Calder Rowan. I'm a civil development consultant, one of those people companies bring in when a project is too complicated, too controversial, or too risky for their in-house teams. If a place had a bad history, I was the one sent to solve it. That's how I ended up in northern Montana, standing at the edge of a forest that felt wrong. Not dangerous, not cursed, just aware. The project was simple on paper. A private logistics facility backed by 3 investors who wanted distance from cities, highways, and regulation. They needed land, cheap, isolated, and legally clean. They found it. Thousands of acres near an abandoned timber route, far from any town you'd recognize, surrounded by forest so dense it swallowed sound. No cell reception, no nearby homes, no listed environmental restrictions. Perfect. At least that's what the document said. The first warning sign came before I even reached the site. The rental truck's GPS stopped updating miles before the turnoff. The road narrowed, asphalt giving way to cracked pavement, then gravel, then something that felt older. Packed dirt shaped by decades of neglect. The trees changed too. They grew closer together, their branches interlocking overhead, dimming the daylight in a way that made my eyes strain. The air smelled damp, metallic, like rain that never quite fell. I remember slowing down, not because of the road, but because I had the strange feeling that I was arriving somewhere uninvited. I shook it off. I've always trusted data over instincts. And data said this land was unused, underutilized, wasted. By the time I reached the temporary site camp, the sun was already sinking behind the tree line. A cluster of portable buildings stood in a clearing that looked forcibly carved out of the forest. The ground was uneven, roots still visible beneath layers of dirt and gravel. Someone had cleared this place in a hurry. Only 5 people were waiting for me. That struck me as odd. There were supposed to be at least 15 crew members already on site. Surveyors, environmental scouts, prep workers. Instead, I saw a handful of tired faces and body language that screamed relief, like they were glad I'd arrived, not because I was in charge, but because I was company. A tall man stepped forward, mid-40s, beard flecked with gray. His name was Harlan Voss, the site foreman. "You made it," he said, not smiling. "Looks like I beat half the team," I replied, forcing a casual tone. Harlan didn't answer right away. He glanced back toward the tree line, then lowered his voice. "Some of them didn't come back this morning." I laughed. I shouldn't have, but I did. "Didn't come back from where?" He looked at me then, really looked at me. "The land." That was the second warning. We sat inside the largest portable unit as night settled outside, the forest pressing close against the thin metal walls. Harlan explained that the initial survey teams had gone out to mark boundaries and identify demolition zones. Standard procedure. No heavy equipment yet. Just marking, measuring, clearing undergrowth. By the end of the first day, arguments started breaking out. Not about money or hours, but about where lines should be drawn. People were getting turned around, Harlan said. Paths wouldn't lead back where they should. Radios cut out. I shrugged. Dense forests do that. Yeah, he said, but bruises don't. That got my attention. He told me 3 workers had returned that evening with injuries. Deep, finger-shaped marks along their arms and shoulders. One had collapsed near the camp entrance, shaking so badly they had to restrain him. Medical reports said stress, panic response, maybe an animal encounter. But none of them agreed on what happened. All of them said the same thing, Harlan continued. They said something followed them, something they couldn't see properly, like it was just there. I leaned back in my chair. I've heard fear talk before. Isolation does things to people. Did they take anything out there? I asked. Souvenirs, tools, markers? No, I nodded. Then tomorrow we reset. Fresh teams, clear objectives. Harlan hesitated. Sir, maybe we slow this down. That was the 3rd warning. I didn't listen. The next morning I walked the perimeter myself. The forest was quieter than any place I'd ever been. Not peaceful, muted. My boots sank into soft soil layered with old leaves, the ground uneven beneath every step. I noticed something strange almost immediately. The trees weren't random. They grew in subtle arcs, bending inward, as if forming corridors that funneled movement in certain directions. Natural, maybe, but unsettling. I stopped near a massive cedar with bark stripped smooth along one side, like something had rubbed against it repeatedly over many years. That's when I heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like a pressure change. The feeling you get when someone stands just behind you. I turned. Nothing. The forest stood still, but I had the overwhelming sense that I was being evaluated. Judged. I told myself I was projecting. Stress. Lack of sleep. Then I noticed the survey flags. They were gone. Every marker placed the day before had disappeared. Not pulled out. Not broken. Gone. That evening, I ordered the clearing to begin. I should have waited. I should have listened. When the first tree fell, the reaction wasn't loud. It was wrong. The vibration traveled through the ground, up my legs, into my chest, like the land itself had flinched. The air shifted. A coldness moved through the clearing, subtle but undeniable. The workers went silent. I told them to keep going. By sunset, several people had quit. No arguments, no demands. They just packed up and left without meeting my eyes. That night, alone in my temporary quarters, I lay awake listening to the forest. Wasn't making noise, was holding it back. And just before sleep finally claimed me, I heard something I couldn't explain. Not a voice, not a sound. A thought that wasn't mine. You don't know what you've stepped into. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear in the usual sense. No racing heart, no panic. But because my body refused to relax. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt pressure behind them, like something was leaning too close to my thoughts. By morning, the forest looked exactly the same. And that was the problem. Fog clung low to the ground, thick enough to blur the distance, but not dense enough to hide anything completely. The clearing where we'd cut the first trees looked raw, wounded. Fresh stumps stood like exposed bone, sap slowly darkening the soil beneath them. The men gathered without speaking. No jokes, no complaints, just quiet, guarded movements. I noticed the way they avoided looking toward the deeper forest, how their shoulders stiffened whenever a branch shifted or leaves rustled. Harlan stood beside me, arms crossed, eyes hollow. "We lost 2 more, he said quietly. I turned to him. "Left?" He shook his head. "Medical. Same as before." Woke up like they'd been in a fight they couldn't remember. I wanted to push back, demand logic, demand facts. Instead, I asked, "Where are they now?" "Regional hospital." They didn't want to talk. That was when I saw it. One of the remaining workers, Silas Keene, early 30s, solid build, was rolling down his sleeve with shaking fingers. I stepped closer. "Silas," I said, "let me see your arm." He hesitated. Then he pulled the fabric back. The marks weren't scratches. They weren't bites. They were deep, uneven impressions, like bruises forming around something that had wrapped and tightened. 5 distinct pressure points, hand-shaped, but too large. "How did this happen?" I asked. Silas swallowed. "I don't know." "Try." His eyes flicked toward the forest. I was marking the eastern boundary, same spot as yesterday. Then I felt crowded, like the air got thicker, harder to breathe. He paused, visibly struggling. I thought I tripped. Next thing I knew, I was on the ground. My radio was gone. My flag markers were gone, and my arm felt like it had been crushed. "Did you see anyone?" I asked. "No." The words came out sharp, defensive. "I heard movement," he added, "but not footsteps. More like weight shifting." I thanked him and told him to take the day off. As he walked away, Harlan leaned closer. "You still think this is stress?" I didn't answer. Instead, I did what I always did when things stopped making sense. I doubled down. We pushed farther into the forest that day, not to clear, but to survey. I went with them this time. 4 workers. Harlan. Me. The deeper we went, the more distorted the forest felt. Distances were deceptive. What looked close took longer to reach. Sounds didn't echo properly. Voices seemed swallowed after a few feet. At one point, I turned around to check our path and couldn't recognize it. The trees behind us looked identical to the ones ahead. No natural landmarks, no clear direction. Harlan stopped walking. "We should mark this point." He drove a bright orange stake into the ground. We took 10 more steps. I turned back. The stake was gone. Not broken, not bent. Gone. No one spoke. We continued anyway. That was when the ground changed. The soil became darker, denser. Roots surfaced more frequently, twisting together in patterns that looked deliberate. I had the strange sensation that we were walking across something layered, like we weren't on land, but on top of it. Silas, against my better judgment, he'd insisted on joining, stopped suddenly. "Do you feel that?" he asked. "What?" I said. Like we're not alone. I wanted to say yes. I didn't. We reached a natural depression in the terrain, a shallow basin surrounded by older trees. The air there felt colder, heavier. My ears rang faintly, like pressure before a storm. And then we saw them. Objects, not tools, not trash. Personal things. A glove, a bootlace, a torn sleeve. All weathered, half buried, as if they'd been there for years. "These aren't ours," Harlan whispered. I crouched down, lifted the glove. It was stiff. Old. "What is this place?" Silas asked. Before I could answer, the forest shifted. Not visually, physically. The ground vibrated faintly beneath my knees, like a deep, distant movement traveling through the soil. The trees creaked, not from wind, but from tension. Then came the pressure again. That sense of proximity. Harlan's voice trembled. Calder, we need to leave. Something moved between the trees. I couldn't focus on it directly. Every time I tried, my vision slid past it, like my brain refused to assemble the image properly. But I felt it. Tall, heavy, close. The workers froze. I stood up. I know you're there, I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. Instantly, the pressure intensified. My chest tightened. My ears rang louder. A thought, not a voice, pressed into my mind. You were warned. Silas screamed. Something struck him from the side. Not a blow, but a force that lifted him off his feet and slammed him into the ground. We ran. We didn't shout commands, didn't look back. Branches tore at our clothes. Roots caught our boots. The forest seemed to close in, paths bending away from escape. Behind us, something moved with deliberate slowness. Not chasing, following. We burst into the clearing, gasping, drenched in sweat and fear. No one spoke for a long time. Silas lay curled on the ground, shaking. His injuries were worse this time. When the med team arrived, I overheard one of them whisper, "It's like he's been restrained." That night, I locked myself inside my quarters. I replayed everything in my head, every decision, every dismissal of warning signs. The land wasn't resisting randomly, it was reacting. And then I noticed something else. My notebook, where I'd logged site data, had new markings. Not handwriting, indentations. Pressed deep into the paper, forming uneven lines that looked almost like symbols, but not ones I recognized. I touched the page. Cold. That was when the realization hit me with sickening clarity. This wasn't about superstition. It wasn't about belief. This place didn't want to be changed, and it was capable of enforcing that. Sleep eventually dragged me under, but it wasn't restful. I dreamed of standing in the forest, watching my own footprints disappear behind me, the ground smoothing itself as if I'd never been there. I woke up knowing one thing for certain. If we continued, someone would die. And somehow, I knew the forest wouldn't stop with just one. By the third day, the forest didn't feel like a place anymore. It felt like a decision. Morning arrived without warmth. The sky stayed dull, colorless, as if light itself didn't want to settle here. The clearing looked smaller than it had the day before. I checked the measurements twice. Nothing had changed on paper. But something had shifted. The camp felt compressed, boxed in by the trees. Even the air seemed heavier, pressing down on my lungs with every breath. Conversations happened in whispers now, even when there was no reason to keep our voices low, especially then. Harlan came to me before breakfast, holding a tablet with shaking hands. "Corporates call in every hour," he said. "They want updates, progress, timelines." I already knew. My inbox was full of messages that ignored context, injuries, fear, everything except deadlines. The investors didn't care about unease. They cared about land, concrete, and profit. "Tell them we're experiencing delays," I said. Harlan gave a tired laugh. "They don't believe in delays." Neither did I, at least not until now. I spent the morning reviewing satellite data, topographic scans, environmental surveys. I was searching for something rational: sinkholes, fault lines, gas pockets, anything that could explain what we were experiencing. The data didn't match reality. Boundaries shifted. Elevation readings conflicted. GPS markers drifted without explanation. It was subtle, just enough to make doubt creep in. By midday, another worker collapsed. This one was named Evan Holt. Quiet, dependable, the kind of guy who never complained. He'd been tasked with cataloging soil samples near the inner boundary. They found him sitting against a tree, staring forward, eyes open but unfocused. He didn't resist when they tried to move him. He didn't respond when they spoke. But when they touched his shoulder, he flinched so violently it took 3 people to steady him. When he finally spoke, it was barely audible. It told me not to step there. I knelt in front of him. "Who told you, Evan?" His eyes shifted to me slowly. "The ground." I ordered an immediate halt to all interior work. For the first time since arriving, I went against the schedule. Corporate didn't like that. The call came less than an hour later. 3 executives on speaker, voices clipped and impatient. "This project is bleeding money," one of them said. "You assured us the land was clear." "It is legally clear," I replied. "But there are variables we didn't account for." "Variables don't bruise people," another snapped. I hesitated. "There have been injuries," I said carefully. "Unexplained ones." Silence, then laughter. Calder, the lead investor, said, "You're not suggesting we shut down a multi-million-dollar project because your crew got spooked by the woods." Woods. That word felt insulting now. "I'm suggesting caution," I said. A temporary pause. "You're suggesting excuses," he replied. "You're there because you're the best at handling difficult sites. Handle it." The call ended. I stared at the blank screen longer than I should have. That afternoon, I walked alone. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I needed to understand the place without interference, without fear feeding off others' fear. I followed the natural contours, letting instinct guide me rather than equipment. The forest felt different when I was alone, less hostile, more curious. The pressure I'd felt before was still there, but it wasn't aggressive. It was watchful, like being studied by something ancient and patient. I reached a part of the land we hadn't mapped yet, a narrow stretch where the trees grew wider apart, their trunks thicker, older. The ground there was undisturbed, layered with decades of fallen leaves. No tracks, no signs of animals, no signs of people, just stillness. I stopped walking. The sensation returned, stronger this time. Not behind me, not around me, below me. I knelt, pressed my palm to the ground. It was cold. Not naturally cold, intentionally so. A memory surfaced then. Not mine. Images flickered through my mind. Land left untouched. Generations passing without intrusion. Storms weathered. Fires avoided. A balance maintained not through dominance, but through restraint. And then another image. Machines, metal, blades cutting into soil that had never been opened. The feeling that followed wasn't rage, it was disappointment. I staggered back, gasping. That was when I understood. This wasn't a guardian. It wasn't a monster. It was a boundary. A line drawn long before maps existed. And we were crossing it. When I returned to camp, things had escalated. 2 more workers were gone. Not injured. Gone. Their vehicles were still there, their gear untouched. Harlan found me near the equipment shed, his face pale. "They walked out toward the eastern ridge," he said. "Didn't respond to calls. Didn't come back." A search team was already forming. I stopped them. "No," I said. "No one goes after them." Harlan stared at me. "We can't just... They're not lost," I said quietly. "They were taken." The words tasted wrong in my mouth, but they felt true. Night fell heavier than before. The forest seemed closer now, the trees edging toward the clearing like an encroaching tide. The generators hummed weakly, light struggling to push back the dark. That was when the markings appeared. Not carved, not burned. Impressions pressed into the soil around the camp, wide, deep, deliberate, not tracks, warnings. They formed a rough perimeter around the clearing, stopping just short of the portable units. It was as if something had drawn a line we were not meant to cross. The workers refused to leave their quarters. No one slept. I sat alone at the edge of the clearing, staring at the dark forest beyond the lights. "I understand," I said aloud. The air shifted. Leaves rustled. Not from wind, but from movement. "I didn't before," I continued, "but I do now." The pressure eased slightly. A response, not in words, but in sensation. Permission. Not to stay. To leave. At dawn, I made my decision. We were shutting the project down. I didn't care about contracts, penalties, lawsuits. No structure was worth what this land would take in return. I gathered the remaining crew and told them we were pulling out immediately. No one argued. As we packed, I felt it watching. Not threatening, not angry. Waiting. The last truck started. I stood at the edge of the clearing one final time. "I won't come back," I said. "None of us will." The forest didn't respond, but for the first time since I arrived, it felt still. We drove away as the road swallowed us, the trees closing behind like nothing had ever been disturbed. Weeks later, the company officially marked the land as unviable. No explanation given, no further attempts made. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel that pressure, faint but present. A reminder. Some places aren't meant to be developed. They aren't empty. They're keeping something intact. And if you push too far, they will push back. Leaving the forest didn't feel like escape. It felt like a sentence suspended. The convoy moved slowly down the dirt road, engines low, tires chewing through wet earth, as if the land itself wanted proof that we were actually going. No one spoke over the radios. No one looked back. I did. The trees stood exactly as they had when we arrived, upright, dense, unreadable. But something in the air had shifted. The pressure that once felt concentrated, deliberate, now seemed dispersed. Like it had learned the shape of us. I told myself that once we reached civilization, once there were paved roads, streetlights, familiar sounds, everything would snap back into place. Fear would dissolve into memory. Trauma would flatten into anecdote. I was wrong. The first sign came 3 days later, after the project was officially halted. I was in a hotel room outside Spokane, staring at spreadsheets I no longer cared about, when I noticed the silence. Not quiet, ambulance. The hum of the building, the distant traffic, even my own breathing felt muted, like sound was being filtered through something thick. I stood up and pressed my palm against the wall. Cold. Not air-conditioned cold. The same cold I'd felt when I touched the ground inside the forest. That night, I dreamed of boundaries. Not fences or lines on maps, but invisible thresholds that divided spaces into what could be taken and what must be left alone. In the dream, I stood on one side, holding a measuring tool that kept warping in my hands. No matter how I adjusted it, the numbers refused to settle. I woke with the certainty that the forest hadn't been confined to its location. It had noticed me. Weeks passed. The company buried the incident the way companies always do. Legal language, reassignment, silence. I was offered another project, then another. I refused them all. I told myself it was burnout, stress, a need for distance. But the truth was simpler. Every undeveloped site now felt wrong. I'd stand at the edge of empty land, desert, plains, foothills, and feel the same subtle pressure I'd felt in Montana. Not as strong, not as focused, but present. As if the land itself had begun to ask a question. Will you respect this? The second sign came in my own home. I live alone in a quiet suburb, the kind of place where lawns are trimmed weekly and neighbors wave without knowing each other's names. I chose it because it felt neutral. One evening, while reorganizing my study, I noticed something odd about the floor. My house sits on a concrete slab. No crawl space, no basement. Yet when I pressed my foot down near the back wall, the floor flexed, just slightly. I knelt and placed my hand flat. Cold. Again. I laughed it off. Settling foundation. Temperature differences. Then I noticed the pattern. The cold wasn't everywhere. It traced a rough curve along the back of the house, following no logical architectural line. A boundary. I didn't sleep that night. I spent hours researching land histories, not just of the forest, but of everywhere I'd ever worked. Patterns emerged that I couldn't unsee. Projects delayed without explanation. Sites abandoned despite profitability. Reports of workers quitting en masse without formal complaints. Places that resisted quietly. Places that endured. The third sign was physical. It started as pressure around my arms and shoulders, deep and aching, as if I'd carried something heavy for too long. Doctors found nothing. Scans were clean. Blood work normal. Stress, they said. I didn't tell them about the dreams where I stood knee-deep in soil that hardened around my legs the more I struggled, or the sensation of being held, not restrained, but steadied, whenever I tried to imagine returning to that forest. The final sign came when the company tried again. A new team, new leadership, same land. They didn't consult me, didn't ask for my input. I found out through a trade bulletin. Same region, different shell company, same coordinates. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I felt it. A pull. Not toward the forest, but away from it. A warning that wasn't fear. It was responsibility. I contacted the project lead, a man named Jonah Merrick, someone I'd trained years ago. I told him everything I could without sounding unhinged. I didn't mention entities, or thoughts that weren't mine. I told him the land was unstable, unpredictable, not worth it. He laughed politely, thanked me for my concern. 2 weeks later, I got a call. The site had been shut down after a series of unusual incidents, injuries, equipment failures, disorientation. No fatalities. They left. That night, for the first time since Montana, I slept without dreaming. I think that was the moment I truly understood. The forest didn't punish us. It corrected us. We'd like to believe we're the final authority over space, that ownership is absolute, that land exists to be transformed. But there are places that don't function under those rules, places that aren't empty, not haunted, occupied by purpose. Whatever exists there isn't good or evil. It doesn't protect out of kindness or attack out of anger. It maintains. And once you've crossed one of those boundaries, once you've felt that pressure, you don't get to pretend ignorance again. That's why I'm telling this story. Not for fear, for awareness. If you ever find yourself somewhere that feels quietly resistant, where your tools fail, your instincts falter, and the land seems to watch rather than react, don't push through it. Step back. Some places don't need us, and some will make sure we understand that. If you're still here, thank you for listening all the way through. If you want more stories like this, slow, unsettling, rooted in places that feel too real, subscribe to the channel. Like and share this with someone who believes land is just property. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time does this story end for you? Just pay attention to how the place around you feels when you do.